The Uneven 9-Patch Ruler by Easy Quilting is one that when I first saw it, I wasn't exactly sure what type of a block we were going to make. But after I got to using it, it's quickly become one of my favorite tools. What it allows us to do is to create this block that I have shown here, where we start out with a 9-patch in the center that's unevenly pieced, and then we add melons around all 4 sides to create a circular block similar to a double wedding ring. On the ruler, we've got 3 different grid lines that we need to be aware of. One of them is when we're trimming the uneven 9-patch block, which is 10.5 inches, and that's the line that we place on the uneven 9-patch block. The second 2 lines are for cutting the melons. One of them is for placing on a 10.5 inch strip to cut whole melons, and then the second line is also used for cutting half melons. And these lines will make more sense as I show them to you as we're working with the blocks. To start out, we're going to begin with a 10.5 inch uneven 9-patch block, which I've already made here. We use 2 different colors with sashing colors and then another color for the outer squares and the center square. And what I'm doing is lining up this particular line on the edge of this block. And one of the things that I found helpful is if we drop the block down so that it is lined up with the cutting lines on our cutting mat, when we're lining up the template, we can line it up also right here along that line. And we also have a center line marked right there. Because this is kind of an awkward shape, I want to make sure that I've got some of my fingers on the grid and then some of them on the cutting mat for stability. And what we're going to do is just follow along this curve, cutting away from ourselves, making sure that we're holding the grid in place. And then we'll just pull the block away. And we're going to continue this cut on all 4 sides, lining this line up along the edge of the block. When we get finished doing this on all 4 sides, we end up with a block that looks like this, where all of our sides are cut out. One thing to note, as we've made these cuts, we've exposed bias edges, so you're going to want to handle this block with care at this stage. Now we're ready to cut our melons. I have a 10.5 inch wide strip of fabric already cut, and on the side that we're cutting our whole melons from, we're going to want to place this on a fold. So what I'm going to do is fold my fabric up and line this line up. And to conserve fabric, I want to try to get that as close as I can, but still have about a 1/2 inch extending so I can make sure that I get a nice cut on that circular edge. So we're lined up with this on the fold of our fabric, holding the grid in place. We're going to follow along the arc and cut. And that gives us a whole melon. And we'll continue that process cutting our whole melons. If we want to cut a half melon for the side of our quilt, we're going to be placing it on the edge of the strip and using that particular line. And cutting there, and that gives us a half melon. Next is we're laying out and assembling our block. We would position our melons in place and then we get ready to sew. And as we're sewing these, what I found to work best was to find the center of the melon just by folding it in half. And I inserted a pin right there to mark that spot. And then likewise did the same thing with the 9 patch. With right sides together, lined up these center points and pinned there. And then worked my way out to the ends so that I was lining up the straight edges that we've cut on both tips and placing a pin there. At this stage it may look a little awkward, but if you're used to sewing curved seams, you know that this is the typical position and placement that we start out with. Next, what we'll do is go ahead and sew this curved seam. As we get ready to sew the melon onto the block, I'm going to position this underneath my presser foot, kind of working my edges, keeping them even together. And sewing slowly, kind of repositioning my edges. Because it was cut from a tool that has the same curve on both sides, it allows it to line up perfectly. When I get to the center point, I drop my needle, lift my presser foot, go ahead and pull that pin, and then start aligning my edges on the other side of the block. Pausing whenever you need to, just drop your needle, lift your presser foot if needed, and reposition the fabric. And then go ahead and sew on out to the tip. After we've sewn our melons in place and pressed them away from the center block, we end up with a curved piece like this. In order to join them together, we continue to add additional pieces where we're actually sharing the melon between 2 piece 9 patches. So that we've got melon, uneven 9 patch, melon, uneven 9 patch, melon, uneven 9 patch, melon, and then fill in with melons on the sides. And that you'll actually continue making your quilt in this fashion by adding additional rows on and having to sew the curved seams connecting each one of those. One of the interesting things that I discovered as I was putting this together, 2 halves do make a whole. If you accidentally line up on the wrong line and cut 2 half melons instead of a whole melon, you can piece it back together and come up with an entire melon. Something else that I thought would be really cool with this particular ruler is to use it to fussy cut a block, which this would be ideal if you had an embroidered motif here in the center. You could cut a 10.5-inch square and then use the ruler just to trim out the edges, centering that where I fussy cut on this fabric. And instead of adding whole melons, added half melons onto the side. I'm thinking this would look really neat set on point with a sashing strip added between the blocks. Lots and lots of possibilities with this uneven 9-patch ruler from Easy Quilting. I've had an incredible time making the sample blocks for this, and it's definitely a ruler that I'm adding to my wish list, and I hope you have as much fun as I did.